So just to kind of start this off and to help people understand what we're doing and what we're going to be talking about, we were talking about having a series of conversations about tarot cards and the differences in our experience, and just like we are two people who are doing very different things and who just, have enjoyed talking about these things.
Yes.
And I have, for so long, I have thought about getting to just sit down and talk with you like this and just compare experiences. And it's funny because we could do that anytime, but it seemed like something that we should do and share.
Yes.
And you and I guess, both just have enough of that, spirit where we just, I love watching the live videos where you share and talk about, your experience with tarot. You say tarot when you talk about it. Among the many differences that we share in talking about stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't talk, I don't go live or record or whatever about this subject very often, but I really admire the spirit that you have in sort of getting out there and digging into these deeper ideas and talking to just whomever might be listening.
Yeah.
And it's something I'm really, I admire you for, and I've been really envious of. Your facility with just the speaking to just whoever is listening.
I'm an only child, so I've talked a lot to myself, to the mirror, to the air. So I have this kind of general philosophy that as human beings, we are reflecting each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I'm looking at myself when I'm doing these lives, and it's kind of a mirror,
mm-hmm.
I realize that as much as I'm sharing it with people, I'm really talking to myself, which is talking to you. So it makes it much easier to just put it out there in the world and not feel self-conscious about it, because
mm-hmm.
If I'm having a problem talking to myself, then that's a much bigger issue, so that's how I approach etymological tarot or traditional tarot or Dungeons and Dragons tarot, whatever. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something really interesting, because I haven't done this so much in terms of being online, but I in the past few years really discovered, I'm not an only child, but I've discovered the value in talking to myself. And there will be times when I have a long car ride or I'm doing the dishes and I just kind of start monologuing to myself. And I don't want to put too much of an occult esoteric gloss on it, but it does really feel like a product of a spiritual tradition and my background growing up, when I was an evangelical Christian, and how much prayer occupied. Yeah. All of that, that time spent talking to whatever or whomever is listening. And I have every time I do the talking to myself thing, I'm always why I wish I remembered to do that more, because it feels productive in a way that I can't really explain. And the idea of putting that out there in front of other people would imagine that I'm more extroverted and that it would be easy for me to talk like that. But honestly, it's very difficult. I have to overcome a lot of stage fright in order to do shows and whatever. Mm-hmm. And also, as someone who, is always managing my own mental health, whatever, there's something about going out there and then just monologuing at people that makes me nervous about myself. And I don't want other people to be nervous about me, And so I guess there's a lot of trust, I guess. It's a beautiful trust fall. You have to be the fool in order to go out and talk openly about things like tarot cards with any sort of earnestness. It's not an area of my life that I would talk about with everyone, but I also am obsessed with and can't stop thinking about and talking about generally. Yes. So it's it occupies a weird crossroads as a subject where I'm why am I not talking about this more? And then every time I want to, I suddenly shut up.
I've been kind of excising that more and more, just because I think that the reason why I feel so much more comfortable doing that readily is because my connection to tarot was elicited by my mother. Like that was the first person that that's how I even knew about tarot cards, was through her.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, I think that because of that, it gave me permission to, even though it was something that she put away after she became born again, and then I in turn became born again, because that's what you do.
Right.
You know, I didn't, like, she didn't speak like ill of it, even though it wasn't something that was, you know, as part of her own evolution as a spiritual actor. She didn't like speak badly about it, even though it wasn't something that was kind of allowed.
Right.
So I think that, you know, the first deck that I bought, I was having this, I was in a Books a Million, and for those that don't know, it's a big, you know, big box bookstore. And I was really having a tough day. And grief is, you know, interesting like that, because you will find yourself really like yearning for this person. And to the point where there are, you know, I was sobbing in the store.
Hmm.
And so I was crying in the store, and I ended up finding this journal that said something about, like, you know, being a woman, and like just very encouraging, and kind of in the voice of like my mother. And I've always wanted to journal more, but I am the type that need like something to triangulate my internal thoughts with what I'm writing down or what I'm creating on the page,
Mm-hmm.
and something else, because it was like there was too much pressure to be like dear diary, and like
Yeah.
be, as a writer, you know, it's like I kind of wanted it to be good or something,
Uh-huh.
you know.
Yes.
So it's like I found myself kind of stymied by that. But like, I got this journal, and I got a tarot deck, like this little kit, and it was like for beginners and stuff like that. And it was this way to be closer in that moment to my mother.
Yeah.
And so I totally connected with that, and it actually did in fact help me create a practice of journaling that has been so instrumental in my spiritual, mental health, my relationships with other people. It's doing all the things that that however you use these tools is supposed to do.
Yes. And it won't do the same thing for everybody, which is, I think, what makes it so difficult to get people, because everyone, to take up a practice, a person needs to have some kind of sense of like guarantee of result, or something that will be worth the effort. And what's really hard to communicate to people is that like the transformation is not necessarily something you can guide from one side, or there's no specific outcome that you know, it's a process of unearthing,
Yes,
you know?
yes. Because I tell everybody, like, I have a lot of people who I think part of it is, as a Black American person, there had, up until quite recently, it's been this thing that because of this, like, the ethnic character of Black Americans is tightly wound with the Black church.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, it's like automatically there is this kind of, or has been, and like I said, it's been taking a turn, but like even West African practices, like, this is something that like was very much kept close to death, or in very particular spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's certainly, in my estimation, exploded. But I say all that to say that a lot of people that end up, sharing a reading with me, they've never had a reading before.
Mm-hmm.
And I share with them that One, I imagine, like, you know, and I just let them know, because every person who is, this is a part of their practice, is going to approach it differently, like you said. But I was like, you know, this is not a predictive tool
Yeah.
for me. It is an analytical tool. It is an unearthing tool. It is this thing that gives symbol to what you already know. Like I will
Yeah.
tell, oftentimes I'm like, I'm probably not telling you something that is totally like, they might approach it like this symbol, this interpretation might suggest that they can apprehend it in a different way, but the nexus of it they already have a feeling of.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that as a part of my own practice.
Well, and first I want to say that what if someone hasn't had a reading before, it's, of course everyone's going to do it differently. And what you're doing, and we'll get into that by and by, and what makes what you're doing different. But what you're doing is very different than what a lot of people would be doing. And I feel that about my own practice, which is also very different from yours. And that's like kind of the struggle, I think, in terms of getting into the subject with people, especially newcomers, because tarot is like one of the most popular things that's really exploded in popularity. And there is a very broad, general public understanding of what this tool is and what it can be used for. And there's also built into it a lot of creativity and play that welcomes people to do their own thing. And then that being said, though, in terms of the more detailed or deeper or granular knowledge about things like history and symbolism and tradition, those things are a very separate, dense subject that can be really academic, but also can be very personal. And so by the time I get, like, I've been, like, the clientele that I work with in terms of tarot stuff has been very slow and gradual, built up over many years. Part of that is just kind of an identity crisis that I feel that I have in terms of having to introduce myself to people and introduce the subject, and to say, to even like explain, like I feel like you said about not using it as a predictive tool. And it's like this spiel that I'm constantly building in my head, where, like, in terms of having to explain to someone why they should pick me to do a reading with or to learn from, and why they maybe should not. Because I'm always the first person to turn someone away and say, this isn't something that I can help you with, or I don't think this is a subject that is good for a reading. Like, I'm not saying that, like, predictions can't happen, or that I haven't had like spooky things happen,
Totally.
but that's just not like what it is. And recently I was doing some writing about this, because I think most people's exposure to this subject comes from things like movies and TV and cartoons, and like very fun but unserious sources
Right.
that are just kind of like having fun with it. And I love a lot of that. I mean, that's how I got into it.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about that
Yeah.
later. But like, but what comes with that is this. I'm like, who taught you that, like, that divination was about predicting the future? Like, the word divination, people just associate with, like, telling the future, but the word fortune telling does not refer to the future. Fortune isn't about what happens in the future, it's about luck.
Yes. Yeah.
It's about fate. And so, like, the idea of being able to predict what happens next is very desirable. But we've even seen in, like, mythology and stories and stuff, half the time when people see, like,
They don't pay no
seers,
nowhere. They don't.
or
Right.
right,
They say, oh, don't turn right. They gonna turn right.
right, or they follow it scrupulously, and then it ends up flipping on them anyway.
Right.
Like whether you know the future or not, like whether you follow the advice or not, there's still this undercurrent to storytelling and myth that says that what's going to happen to you, like, can't necessarily be predicted meaningfully.
Correct.
So, like, why, if people are going to come to you and be like, is this person ever going to love me? And I'm just like, there's so many other ways to have a conversation about this, but, like, the predictive one, as much as I sympathize and relate to the desire to know,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter. Like, okay, maybe the person will love you for like 10 minutes on a Friday
Right.
and then get over it. Are you happy now? Like, no,
Right.
of course not.
Right. Right. there are more layers to pull back.
Mm-hmm.
And my first reading with anybody, I give everybody the same spread. It's like I kind of mixed up some Lenormand techniques, and I'm like, I like this because now you don't have to be responsible for coming up with the question.
Yes.
Because it's like sometimes I realize, and this is how I started this, like the first couple, people were asking me really specific questions, and I was like, that's in the same vein of what you just said. It's like, yes, I could answer this question definitively based on a story that I could come up with based on the symbols and the
And
spread.
a lot of people will do that
Yes,
as a
they will.
reading, and that's all they know how to do. And it's like, that's maybe what, if people have experience with being with readings in the past, that might be the experience that they're hoping for.
Yes, and I found those to be almost off-putting for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that is why my particular style has evolved to this point in the form it has, because I'm like, I much rather like create a portrait or a context or a vessel that
Mm-hmm.
many things can be poured into. It could be heated up over a fire. It could be cooled. There are many possibilities that are more creative. And so that is something that connects with, I think, both of us as creative people.
Yeah. And as we have this conversation or future conversations about this recurring, I really, one of the things I'm hoping to is to get into that more and more. Like, I would love to have you talk more about your specific technique and, how it works, and, to share that. And I would love to share that
Because
as well, like
those
from my side.
I would love to know. I want to know, especially since this has been, I mean, I met you what shit? It's been,
A decade,
oh shit.
maybe longer,
Oh no,
2012, I
over
think.
a decade.
Mm-hmm.
It's over a decade. Because we met in 2011.
11. Mm-hmm. And we didn't talk about any of this stuff really. I mean, we've talked about it incidentally over time, but it wasn't like how we got to talking or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, it was kind of just more of a fun thing, and not a very surprising thing to discover that you were interested in this and doing, having your own universe of it. But what I love about it is that this is a sphere, like I said, that is so popular, and everyone's got their hustle on trying to do readings and stuff. And there can be like a lot of competition in terms of people who are trying to do this professionally or be known a certain
Mm-hmm.
way for what they can do. Like there's some of that like old school hustler mentality left over that's attached to these arts that persists. And what I love is how many people I have actually gotten to know, whether they do astrology, which I know almost nothing about, or like, other spiritual arts, that like I basically it there are people out there that I see that I am wary of, but like I don't necessarily feel competitive with people because I've just been doing my own thing for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And like at most, I'll see somebody making great use of a platform or getting their message out there, and I'll be like, oh, damn, I wish I was doing that. But like, it's nice to be able to talk about ideas. Like, I just knew that you would be a great person to talk with on the subject at length because we're, as far as I can tell, maybe not doing anything the same
Yeah. Yeah.
in in what we do, how we read, you know, and I find that really fascinating because over time, with any practice that becomes more and more advanced, it tends to become more specific. And now that I'm doing this very specific practice, it is the kind of thing that I do want to share with people and teach them how to do because I think I have hit a vein that is useful and approachable to people. But
Mm-hmm.
it's also so specific and so counter to what people might encounter from reading books or whatever, that like I also don't even really know who it's for. you know, like it's not for everyone.
You know, it's crazy. It's like I also share with people who share readings with me, that like that's why I use that language of sharing,
Hmm.
because I'm like I feel like even though this is specific, and I try to do things that like connect us through the digital space, because I haven't, I've only, well, that's not true. I have gotten a chance to do readings where it's face to face, and that has
Hmm.
been amazing, because I've been utilizing sound
Hmm.
as a part of it, and like earphones. And so it's this very intimate, you know, because, you know, there have been two occasions where I've done readings at like a party,
Hmm.
which is a very like different kind of
Yeah.
experience than, I mean, extremely different. But like, how do I create that level of intimacy? Well, I have been using some of the tools that I've developed for like Cheeky Lachey
Yeah.
and karaoke to create this like voice modulated earphone experience where they're like, oh my gosh, you're just talking to me. And I'm like, we're just talking, even in
Yeah.
the midst of all of this activity. And so that was the last time that I first and last time that I did that. And that is creating a whole different possibility, um, in my understanding of that symbology, storytelling,
Right.
improvisation, collaborative experience.
So like I back when I moved to New York City in 2002, like doing tarot stuff was one of the, as I was just like desperately trying to like survive in the city, and that was one of the ways that a shingle that I put out to try to, you know, I was doing readings and teaching lessons, and pretty presumptively, I would say now, because I was just like, you know, getting a handle on these things myself. But you only have to know more than the person that you're teaching.
Right.
That was my mentality at the time. And it was, you know, I did my best to be like ethical and useful and whatever. But part of it, I did work a couple of parties, and nothing bad happened in those experiences, but they were deeply unsatisfying to me because of I was not able to adjust my connection to people. You know, I did some readings that people probably thought were fine for a reading you get at a party. People's expectations are pretty low. I did okay, but I didn't like how it felt because I didn't have any confidence in my ability to reach people when there's so much else going on and people are drunk, etc. And I really shelved it after that, and I didn't. I turned down a lot of invitations to do things like that. And then last year, I was invited locally by the Shakespeare company that I work with. They were having a big fundraiser event, and they invited me to do. They reached out asking if I knew anyone who would read at their, you know, big event for people all evening. And at first, I thought they were reaching out because like they, you know, knew that I did this. And then, in fact, they were just reaching out to see if I knew anyone. So I tentatively was like, oh, well, you know, I would do this. I could do this for you. So I agreed to read cards at this event, kind of as a test, because we're talking about a span of like 10, 15, 20 years away from those experiences that had made me say, like, I don't want to read cards for people at a party anymore. And I was like, look, I've adapted as a human. I'm more stable. My practice is far more advanced. I wanted to test it. I've been working with this new system. I wanted to roll it out in front of as many people as possible. And during the pandemic, it was impossible to read people face to face, and I wanted to like kind of break the seal. So I did this party, and I don't remember how many people I read that night. It might have been 20 or 30 people for like, you know, a small spread that I had adapted to that evening's purpose.
Mhm.
And it was so incredible. I loved it. I'm not saying I want to do it like all the time, you know, but it was exciting to not dread it anymore and to watch my new practice reach people
I
and
I
be
I
effective.
love that because, you know, there is, I mean, it's a party, so there is
Yeah,
a level of lightheartedness to it, you
yeah,
know, that also affects the way you are feeling about what you know, because it's like, you know, one of the things that I also share with folks, I'm like, the card is not a punishment.
Right.
You know, it's not a punishment. It's not trying to make you feel like crap or anything like that. It's like, for me, my approach is like, just give yourself permission to believe that they're not trying to lie to you. They're just pictures on a piece of paper.
Right.
They're true because they exist in this moment.
Right.
And like, you know, to be able to do that in a space like a party where it's like, okay, this is happening. Like, that's everybody, almost everybody, like, you know, recognizes that a party is happening. And so you can kind of like, you know, link that to what's going to happen in the reading. But I'm glad that, you know, you gave yourself permission to break the seal. And, you know that, like, because I know a lot of people, or maybe people knew more than I do, but knew better than I did. But I realized that I am, in fact, a very socially adept introvert. So my favorite, right? My favorite is the one-on-one, and like being able to have that and share. But there is something, like, it's something about that abridged experience that unlocks some levels to the images that you see all the time with your individual folks. That bring back to them too.
And one thing that was really key about it too is that knowing how I felt about this experience, it really was for me about boundaries also. And I'm like, I need to create a version of this experience that I can cheerfully welcome people to at a party, with it, you know, in a sincere way, and then and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end that I'm in control of. And then when it's over, the ride is over, the bar raises, and they get off the ride. Because I know that, like, you know, especially if you reach people, like, it can lead into this thing where maybe they haven't been reached like that in a while, and they just want to prolong the experience. And I'm like, no, I have people to read. I've got stuff to do. Like, every part of it though has to be gracious, and it has to be part of the party. Like, you don't want to be the sour person at the party who's like, all right, I read your cards, get away from me. And it was challenging because there are always, you know, strange rangers out there. And I had a person who sat down in front of me, and he let me know kind of early on in the reading that he was like an intense skeptic of this. And he basically wanted to do the reading to try to resist the reading or to challenge me about, like, you know, how it works, because he had read about cold reading techniques and like all of the stuff, and he wanted to see. And it was great because I had to overcome this initial kind of fight or flight response, and to be the person that I know I am, and, you know, have the integrity of my practice, and to say, okay, well, like, here's what I'm doing. And then I like welcomed him into it, and we did like a reading together, and I didn't feel confronted or challenged, and I could tell it gave him a lot to think about. And he very quickly, because of my response, didn't feel that he was being like conned or, you know, tricked or whatever. So it was like, and I liked it because as much as it was not like super fun for me, I also wasn't particularly bothered. And that really comes from knowing the answer to any question any random question that someone has about tarot or about how any of this works. You know, even if my answer is to say, I don't know.
Right.
I don't have a good answer for that. But I'm not going to pretend that I do as a way of tricking you into thinking that I'm like, you know, some incredibly mystically powerful person.
I mean, it's the same thing. It's so connected to, you know, what I mentioned, like I'm not here. The cards aren't here to indict you.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
For me, it is about, like, you know, so much of, like, there is not like, the voice in your head isn't necessarily audible because it hasn't changed. Like, the voice in your head sounds the same as when you were 5, as when you were 35, but your voice sounds completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So there, you know that there is something beyond, even though it's processed through language,
Yeah.
there is something symbolic that like you, it's like a series of impulses, and you know that you can describe through words, but the words aren't necessary, which is why the pictures are so powerful. That why, like, you know, in like you're talking about things that have been around longer than Homo sapiens have been around,
Mm-hmm.
like a snail, or you know what I mean, like those kinds of things. And so that's speaking to that enduring impulse that is like, it doesn't there's no legality to it, there's not even like morality to it.
Right. We're really just kind of it is uh it is just entering into like a shared mind space, and people on both sides bring themselves into it. And this is why I think it is so, I mean, I don't allow myself to be read very often and under pretty specific conditions, and
Right.
it's not like I'm super rigid about it, but like over the years, going back to what I said about boundaries, like when I was younger, I just didn't really know anything about how to set myself or anyone up for like a good experience. And now I have done so much thinking and journaling and working on this kind of thing, and it is an area now that is like it's at the forefront of my mind when I encounter anyone, when I'm talking to a cashier at a store, you know, or when I'm at, you know, any situation where I'm like, what are the like acceptable and expected parameters of this encounter, and is there room to play with them, or do they need to stay rigid for a reason because it either protects me or it protects the other person, or both? And that's why, you know, when you're out in the world, suddenly it's nice to be able to like surprise someone, and like a bubble opens up where you can have the kind of conversation that you forget that you might even be capable of having out loud with somebody, you know?
For real. I mean, Mrs. Amok or Mr. Samak says it's like that white room in the Matrix. And
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I can certainly um I can co-sign that to a degree. Although sometimes it's like being in like a yurt with like embroidery everywhere too. You know, it really does, it really does depend. But like the fact that there could be a wall that you could push off of
Hmm.
using this rubric
Right.
is a space. And that's why it was so powerful for me as a journaling tool,
Hmm.
because it was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to, you know, I don't have to pick from everything. I
Yeah.
I can like, you know, because the cards themselves are boundaries, you know, whether it's like, you know, the suits, you know, the elements that are ruling these things. It helps, it again, it helps create this vessel that you could pour a lot of stuff in,
Hmm.
you know, but there is like, you know, there's a swaddling about it that makes that like elicits a level of safety that is oftentimes required when you're talking about these really deeply, sometimes traumatic, sometimes, you know, paradigm shifting things.
Yeah. I that I so you that you shared when we started about your story of like how kind of like why you needed this and what it gave you, and I love that that's where you started, because that it took me like a long time to get there, because for me, like, so without that family connection, like as a person coming from a background of intense faith, like I really needed something to believe in and to kind of transition to, kind of like a portal to like other mysteries that religion barely scratched the surface of. So it was a kind of, it was part of my transition out of evangelical Christianity.
Mm,
And early on in it, there was like the taboo element that I really was interested in, of course.
indeed.
But what bothered me about it early on is I really, to the extent that it worked at all or did anything, I didn't understand why or how. And so over time, or I want to say the next like 5 years or so, it became something that I could scrutinize and test and learn about. Like, Does it work? Why does it work? How does it work? And like I read as many books as I could find, but they were all really inadequate because so many of them either just overlap the same like subject matter. Nothing really cites back then, especially. I have better books now, but
Yeah.
nothing I could find really cited any like credible authority. There was all sorts of like exoticism and like racism and ignorance and stuff
Yeah.
that was just like built in as if it was supposed to be part of this exalted tradition. But so like, but just like before with Christianity, I could no longer just like blindly believe. Like a lot of the um, tradition of this is kind of seductive in the way that it's just like, oh, you just give yourself over. It's like go to the unconscious and like, and without really talking about what that could perpetuate that comes up from the unconscious with it. So I did not want to do this blindly. I had to kind of arrive at my own answers. And that's when I started writing about tarot quite a lot in 2008 and started a
Mm.
blog about it. And then like that gradually, that was what led me to that point you're talking about where I could be like, this is how this is a tool, even if no one else is involved,
Hmm.
um, that informs how I interpret events and how I categorize information and
Hmm.
how it can help me give shape to like what otherwise like senseless or formless experiences,
Hmm.
and that alone is very valuable and very transformative. And then it also has been transformative in terms of sometimes, of course, actually making decisions based on the results of divination,
Right.
you know, but in ways that maybe were not predictive either. But it's just like what I think is interesting, the deeper when you have trust in your practice,
Hmm.
is if you get an answer, you can just follow the answer.
Right. Right. Like I don't like again, like just to be like, like whether it would there's certain cards that uh would come up early in this, in this journey that would, you know, because I was building my library, and I also finally gave myself permission to know that some of this stuff I had access to through other avenues of research,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be, you know, basically, we had like we probably had, I shouldn't even say two, we probably had at least four concordances in my house. We had various versions of the Bible. Like there were, like my mother was probably, if she wasn't a single mom, black embodied person, she probably would have been a theologian. So it's like that whole notion of study, to know
Mm-hmm.
that I had access to a knowledge of a lot of these symbols that are in there, and to know that like some of it goes back to ancient Egypt, to Greece, but an interpretation of Egyptian modalities as reinterpreted by the Greeks,
Mm-hmm.
or then like reinterpreted by the Romans, and then also knowing about like West African traditions through just the residue of this is in a Black American context, but then also knowing that like that indigeneity is not just like this vaguely uh Asian looking person, that it could also be a Black person too.
Mm-hmm.
All of that connected together again, like inspired the confidence that I don't have to like be, that it's not an indictment, meaning that I don't have to indict each of the symbols that are like, that's bad, that's
Right.
good. It had permission, it gained permission, really quickly, that it could just be a representation of an energy, and
Yeah.
that I could turn the volume up or down on it.
Right, right. I really appreciate hearing that because I know that's like a thing that I sit and fume about but and don't really ever write about or talk about is like a lot of the, now people, especially because tarot is so popular and it's meeting this moment where people are really challenging a sense of identity. And like there's so many people who are trying to remake the tarot or like create like a different version, you know, that is like not just changing the artwork to reflect like a different aesthetic in terms of bodies and ethnicities and all of that, which I have no problem with. But like also like just like reforming the deck itself and like what the cards mean and everything. And that is the kind of thing, like those are the moments where I start to feel like I'm like, oh no, I'm a conservative, because I start to feel like I'm not a traditionalist per se, but things are included. And also the tarot's history and how what got included and what didn't is so haphazard. It makes no sense to be super protective of this or that, because there's a dozens of other decks that didn't survive that were totally different. And if those had survived, maybe the decks we're using today would be totally different. But like also I'm very protective of people changing or throwing things out that they don't understand, or they have not had, like they, if you have like a really, you know, personal knee-jerk response to a particular idea, like I'll give an example of, which is like hierarchy in the court cards,
Yes.
you know, like, and the idea that it goes from like page to king or whatever, and that's one of the, and like the gender stuff in there, and I'm like, you know, on one hand I totally get it, but what I think the value is in just like keeping it and understanding it and playing with it is that as much as we aspire to a world where these things don't rule our lives, we live in a world that is completely controlled by hierarchy, and surviving in it and imagining ourselves in different spaces in it might require like that symbolic framework just to like be able to relate to the world around
One,
us, even if we don't want that.
100%. I mean, I think that like the tarot and like the etymological tarot that I've been playing around with has been like, what it did is it made me recognize the commitment to false hierarchies,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as a Black woman, that oftentimes there is a hierarchy imposed that puts me here and everyone who is not Black femme body here. But that's
Mm-hmm.
a false hierarchy, because there is a lot of times my my dream is this, that it is an exchange, that there isn't a hierarchy. But if we were to have a hierarchy, if it's a true hierarchy, then I would be here and they would be here.
Right.
So it like it's like, okay, I see what's happening here, that like instead of like me being like, yes, that's true, the hierarchy is oftentimes like, you know, it's a thing, it's an interface that is useful for, you know, the patriarchy, capitalism, all that, right? But it exists.
And it's not escapable or optional
It's
in
not,
most of the world we live in.
it's not, it's everywhere. And so how can I kind of play this game, you know, because there's also like, you know, the fact that it's connected to like a lot of these ideas, because life is so connected to gaming, like that luck is a part of it, that like
Mm-hmm.
be very skilled and still luck is a part of this experience.
Right.
And like that one of the rules, or one of the aspects of any game, is that there are in fact rules.
Right.
And
Right.
so sometimes those rules are designated by page, knight, queen, king. It just, you know, but again,
Yeah.
those rules aren't an indictment.
Right. And like you can get around those rules in lots of ways. And I like that the deck contains all sorts of trickster elements and like challenges to hierarchy. But
Yeah.
but like without an acknowledgement of like the framework you're working in, like that stuff sets you up to be like chopped down just as easily, you know, like you, like there's no utopian, like it's interesting because people use tarot as not to help dream their way forward, and the tarot itself is an expression of like a philosophy that involves dreaming your reality into the material,
Yeah.
which and so that's an incredibly beautiful thing, but that also there is still so much of an emphasis on the material in the deck itself, because that is part of the, you know, the whole
I mean,
uh
Well, the pentacle as a symbol is that quintessence at the top being distributed through these four elements.
Right.
And I think that yeah, I'm totally I love all the decks. I mean, I now, like many people who utilize this practice, have more than one type of deck.
Yeah.
And I and it's crazy because it's like some of them, it's like sometimes it's a matter of like the feel of the card.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
the paper,
the paper, the imagery, the size. There are all these aspects that like draw me to having more than one. But I will say that I only like my readings, it's still with traditional deck.
Yeah.
And that's what I usually like. I'll play around with different decks like for my journaling purposes, but probably 75 to 80% of all of that comes from the deck that's by my bed, and all, and for my own reasons of why I keep it in this particular box and
Yeah.
stuff. But I like that. And I also appreciate the kind of things that come along with, like, where that Rider Waite deck comes from, and
Yeah.
the Golden Dawn and all of that stuff. Like I am okay, and in fact encouraging of those histories as a part of how I am utilizing it as a tool.
Oh, that's so well said, because like there is so much there that like that deck is like I love it uncritically in a lot of ways, because it is an expression, like the tarot has manifested itself in the world through these like imperfect means on an ephemeral like cardstock, which is difficult to preserve. Cards are lost, cards are burned, cards are broken. It's like I've always thought that it is the most human of divination tools, because it is this like conglomerate of just like all sorts of random bits and pieces, good and bad, that are it is so human, even in its imperfection, and therefore I love, like you said, there's a lot of decks I use, especially to share readings with people so that they get to see different things. But like, there is something about going back to the Rider Waite deck and how the mark that it made, and how it just like really embodies that everything that humans have tried to transcend in order to do something and make something perfect, and it highlights how impossible it is to do anything perfectly, and that's not even our job as humans, to be perfect or to make a perfect, you know, a perfect deck, or to understand the divine or the cosmos perfectly. This is what I drew the Fool card for someone recently, and I always take that as a great, fun reminder to say that, like, we don't need to know everything. We can't, even if we needed to, which no one is asking us to, we couldn't. So there's like a wonderful sense of surrender in that, and to use imperfect tools and to take risks in terms of reaching out beyond ourselves and then trying our best to incorporate the results into our pathetic lives,
Yes.
and then working with what we've got. So I mean, this is what, over time, that's my like love affair with the tarot, is just like the humanity of it, because there are many, many, many divination forms, and I'm sure you have, I've played with a lot of them and gotten a lot of incredible experiences out of them.
Runes and dice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I and like, this is what I love about the conversation we've had today, and what I hope it yields. This is going to help us dig in the future and welcome people into like a talk, because we've like talked so much about a lot of things, but we've also barely even scratched the surface at what you are doing in your entomological tarot, and what I'm doing with my Arcanologue project.
Oh my God.
And like, this is the first I've even said that. So it's like we have like I hopefully introduced ourselves a bit adequately to anyone who is listening. I just wanted to create a conversation for people who are interested in, you know, some different perspectives, because there's it's hard. It takes a little vanity or ego to poke in and start having a talk about stuff that you know is already just like so heavily discussed elsewhere
Yes,
by so many people, including many people that I admire and would not want to like compare myself
absolutely
to. So
same.
yeah.
But you
So
know,
maybe
I
yes.
I think that's the courage of the fool. You know,
Yes.
it's just it's the zero is all and nothing. It's like that's just the paradox of what I've that's a part of what has like glommed itself to me is the fact that this is quite literally the expression of paradox, that pursuit of best or highest, or that
Hmm.
chemical pursuit of refinement.
Right.
It like you'll never reach it, but
Hmm.
it's the pursuit, it's the investigation, it's the query, it's the investigation that is so worthwhile.
Yes, yes. It shapes you into the kind of person, um, you know, like I really have felt my mind over these years just from proximity to these ideas and trying to embody them. Like it has changed me.
Yeah,
Um, and in ways that when I was younger, you know, you read about this stuff and you kind of wonder if it's true, or you hope that it's true. You wish to be transformed. You want to become wise. You know, you want to have powers, you know, if not magical powers, even just like a greater facility with like all of these tools and elements. And, um, you know, and your life and my life aren't perfect and we have our struggles. And, but like there is something about being this person that, you know, has gradually transformed that I have to attribute to this practice. And that's the kind of thing like that keeps me wanting to talk about it and pipe up and write about it too, because I can't give this to everyone, but I can help people realize that it's possible,
yes,
you know, not
yeah,
to become like me, but to undergo a process that will show you who it's possible to become.
100%. Very well said.
So if that's something that people want to learn more about, I would definitely recommend that they follow you and your etymological tarot and like, you know, myself and
Like
whatever the heck
what?
I'm doing, you know, and like, and to follow along with the conversations that we're going to be having so that, you know, because we're just like, we are, you know, our own little hermits, like raising our own little lanterns on far apart mountaintops. You
Yeah,
know, so there those end up being signals for other people to follow or not
right.
as they
Or
wish, but we are undeniably out there and doing it though, so
yes, that's true. That's true. There's no doubt about that. So I can't wait to, I mean, if this first conversation is any indication, this should about to be on and popping. Okay. Like I feel like I have been enriched by, like, I mean, some of it I can infer based on like what I see online. And I think that could be true for me as well to you.
hmm
But like to actually have the conversation, it's like, I wonder. I know that like when I do because I do my little, I play around with different spreads. Like I'm always like, that's the other part that I like about this is that the research thread, it keeps going and going and going.
uh-huh.
And so I'm like, oh, I know that what you said is going to, like, I'm going to find it popping up in my next reading, journaling, thinking.
hmm
And so I'm grateful for that as well.
Yeah, and that has happened in the past with you for me also because of, you know, tuning into stuff that you have shared and like just like versions of things that I have been scratching at that I wouldn't have thought about otherwise, or even just seeing your like really radical approach to just like integrating this like visual medium with language and like what comes out of it. And not only does it show me how much more I have to learn, but it has given me confidence because like as someone who's kind of like mining my own vein over here, I'm like, see, that's like how far there is to go. Like, you don't know how much further it could go. And if you're doing something that you don't see expressed elsewhere, you know, on one hand, you just want to devote yourself to it as, you know, as much as intensely as possible, you know, to the extent that it's healthy, so that you can like get wherever that it takes you, but also to share, you know, because I think about that sometimes, because I'm like, I could be wiped out tomorrow and I've done all this work. And if it just was a matter of being transformative to me or helping to like illuminate a path for some other people along the way, that's beautiful. But I would love for there to be more, because there's
Thank
so much darkness out there, and there are so many strange blind alleys. Like, there's whole books and ideas of that I thought I had to incorporate into my tarot practice for years and years that were such a waste of time. And I wish that I had had someone like me to follow. And I did find some people actually helped me clear a lot of those cobwebs out. And I'm forever grateful for that. So it's like, you can just kind of end up in the same whirlpool for years, chasing after things that don't seem to fit right or feel right. And you don't know why, you know, why you're supposed to do them. You just know that you are supposed to do them. And sometimes it takes that other person, like a Kenya or a Bloom or
you.
whoever, to be like, that's not important. You don't have to waste any
You
time
don't
on
have
that.
to waste any time on that, or you can make the visit very short.
Yes, yeah, like, okay, got it. Yeah, like, it's, you know, that's the problem, is that some things, some elements of a practice reveal themselves after years and years of doing the same repetitive grind. And then some things, all you got was what you got. Like, you could have done it in 10 minutes.
Yes.
So,
Yes, I paradox.
well, why don't we wrap this up for now then, and save our energy, and you know, we'll figure out some more things to talk about
Yeah.
soon, and welcome people to, you know, listen to that. And in the meantime, we'll share this wherever it makes sense to share it. I'm going to share this on the Judgment podcast, you know, through Substack, and we'll figure out other places, but and then more will be revealed
More
in time.
will time. Thank you so much, Bloom. As I called it, Bloom and Robin, because I just see,
Yes.
I don't know, it just seemed pretty.
Or Robin and Bloom. I don't have to go first.
No, I like Bloom and Robin, but
It
you
is
know, yeah,
alphabetical, but like, you know,
yeah, and
in
it,
English.
yeah, and it's kind of like Batman and Rob, but whatever.
Ah!
But whatever. You know what? It'll change. It'll stay the same. It says I have a few different tools. Terry Bailey says I have a few different tools that I used for other folks. I have to remind myself to use tools for my benefit too. Thanks for this. Yes,
Yes, yes.
that's the power of the flexibility of this. That it's for other people, but it's for we're other people sometimes too.
Yeah, and I would have done this with you even if we were just on the phone.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. That's what's gorgeous about it, because
yeah,
it makes it easier for sure.
right, right. Well, thank you, and thank everybody who listened while we were recording, and in advance to those who will listen later. So I really appreciate the spirit of the enterprising spirit of getting started with something, and we'll see where we go from the Fool.
We'll see where we go from the Fool.